Hi everyone. So you couldn't have failed to see the announcement late on Friday that Sony was working on a PlayStation 4.5. This is what the press have colloquially called it. Now, my feeling here is that the rumour mill has gone into overdrive on this one and may have pretty much got the wrong end of the stick. So what exactly is the rumour? Well, the rumour is that Sony are working on a brand new PlayStation 4 capable of 4K gaming. Now, this announcement, just coming probably about 2 years after the console's been released, just over, it's unusual, and normally this would be something we would dismiss as rubbish. If it wasn't for the fact that Sony and Microsoft both have a problem with their consoles. Neither of them can do 4K. That's basically 4 times the resolution of 1080p, or HD gaming as we know it today. Now, there's been a big push really in the PC gaming environment to hit those 4K resolutions. But to do it, you'd require a huge amount of performance power. And even the next Pascal chips coming up from Nvidia are not going to deliver 4K for anything under around £400 to £500. Even in the best case scenario, it's not going to be cheap. So what makes anybody think Sony are going to release a 4K capable console 2 years after launching a 1080p console? Why do people think that's going to happen? Because it isn't. What has happened here is actually a rumour from around 18 months ago, in fact, just after the PlayStation 4 was released. Sony muted that they would at some point have to make the PlayStation 4 4K capable. Not necessarily does that mean gaming at 4K. So, this rumour obviously hasn't died, it's gone away and come back, most likely because Sony have started talking to developers about what this might mean. They're all under NDA, so the only thing they can actually say is, there's a PlayStation 4.5 coming, but can't really elaborate too much further. Now here is what I believe, because based on the fact that there is no way Sony can split the entire ecosystem into 2 sets of consoles, because the performance required to actually hit 4K means essentially re-architecting the console. You're not just going to be slapping a faster GPU in this and going, yay, now we can do 4K. So, what are Sony actually doing? They are going to release a PlayStation 4 with a 4K upscaler. Simple as that. It will have Blu-ray 4K support, which will be native because we don't need to do any complex GPU rendering. It's not like we also need 4K textures and we need the RAM to be able to store those in temporarily. We don't. Essentially, we can take 1080p footage, we use a hardware upscaler to bring that up to 4K resolutions, but we're still dealing with the same 1080p underlying hardware. The Blu-ray aspect, which is what we're really talking about when we talk about a 4K capable PlayStation 4, is running directly off the N-Engine chip, and it doesn't actually require an upscaler at all. That is purely a case of video frame buffer off to the screen. Now this means that essentially, given Sony's ability to miniaturize the parts within the PlayStation 4, not only in die shrinking but also in the cost of manufacturing, it means there'll be space to put a hardware upscaler in, and also any additional gubbins required to hit the 4K Blu-ray at the highest possible bitrate, which is the HDR option, what they call HD HDR, I think it is, or high dynamic range 4K. Now, why is this the way Sony are going to do it? Well, quite simply, there is no way they can release 2 consoles on the market, ask developers to produce resources for both versions of the game, because at the end of the day you can't produce textures for 1080p and simply use them on 4K. It doesn't work like that. What you then end up with is blurry textures. A much better solution, of course, is to take what you have at 1080p and upscale it. Now, the reason for Sony doing this is quite simple. You can't split this ecosystem. It would be absolute suicide to turn around and say, oh, by the way, you now have to either rebuy your games again, or we'll have to provide another remastered version for 4K. It's not going to work. Developers are not going to wear it. They're not going to be interested in doing it, no matter how dominant Sony happen to be right now. There's also the issue that there's already about, 30 million PlayStation 4s now in the market or something silly like that. I mean, the numbers are absolutely off the chart worldwide. And so when you look at a situation like that, even if a large number of people buy 4K sets, which the sales through at retail at the moment don't suggest is happening. Last Christmas was not the year for 4K. It probably won't be 4K Christmas this year either. There is no compelling reason for Sony to split the ecosystem, to spend that kind of money effectively retooling the entire console along with AMD for a new architecture. Because let's face it, you're going to need a new architecture for this. You're going to need more RAM, you're going to need faster GPUs, you're going to need much faster bus speeds available there all round to move 4K content between GPU and screen. It's not going to be an easy task at all. And the same reason why I'm very sceptical of Microsoft talking about an external breakout box for the Xbox One to do the same thing. Now, yes, we know AMD has this external GPU technology, a plug-in GPU as it were. But realistically, they tried to do this a few years ago and the industry turned around and went, that's a crap idea. Nobody wants that. I don't see the same suddenly being true for the consoles. We're not suddenly going to turn around and say, yeah, external breakout boxes, which developers then have to do even more development work for, higher resolution text and all this. It isn't going to work and it isn't going to fly and nobody's asking for it. And that's always the key thing here. How many people are actually asking for a 4K capable games console? No, don't hear a lot of people. There's a simple reason for that, because a lot of 4K television sets have upscalers in them, funnily enough. So we know that upscaling game content works pretty damn well. There's another issue here as well. If you have a more powerful games console, what are developers going to do with that extra power if they're given the opportunity? Are they going to say, okay, let's take a 30 frames per second presentation of a game and do 30 frames a second presentation in 4K? Or are they going to say to themselves, the bulk of the install base for Sony PlayStation is 1080p. Hooray, my game can now do 60 frames a second on the PlayStation 4 at 1080. There is no compelling reason for game developers to use that additional performance power, maybe made available for 4K, to actually do 4K with it. You'd be much better off serving the largest portion of the user base with faster, higher quality content at 1080p. So again, when you hear all of this stuff going around about people saying, oh, PlayStation 4.5, 4K capable gaming console, no. Technically, from a retail point of view, from a point of view of what developers are looking for, this is not going to happen. It is not going to be a 4K capable gaming console launched just a couple of years after its primary forefather. It isn't going to happen. When we will see true 4K capable game consoles is going to be in around another 5 years' time, because at that point the cost of the GPU technology and the full system architecture to deliver that with gusto is actually going to be affordable for development at Sony and Microsoft to actually go ahead with, to actually build this hardware. Otherwise, as we can see from PC development, you're going to be talking £1,000 at least to actually have 4K capable gaming at 30 frames a second. Let's not even bother going to the 60 frames a second stuff. At the moment, there is no way that either company can produce a 4K capable gaming machine at a reasonable price point and still make a profit. And neither company is going to come to market if they cannot make profit. That leaves only 4K upscaling and 4K capable Blu-ray as the only option in this rumour. So what do you think? Is Sony going to be producing a 4K capable gaming machine, or do you think I'm right on this one? Well, time of course will tell, but certainly none of the rumours I've heard over the last 18 months or so suggest Sony is about to gear up for a brand new PlayStation, because that's what we're talking about if it's a 4K capable gaming machine.